Moving on to page 3 in the Unit 9 study guide. Abiotic factors are non-living things. These are related to density independent limiting factors such as earthquakes, floods, and natural disasters. We already defined carrying capacity. Biomagnification is the process of toxins increasing as they are passed through a food chain. So while biomass and energy decreases, toxins are going to increase as they move through the food chain. This is in the Human Impact PowerPoint on slide number, let me get to that slide, just one second, here we go. It's on slide number 14 of the Human Impact Ecology Notes. And as you can see, as the mercury is coming out of the factory, it's a very small amount. It lands on the water. And then as the phytoplankton eat that, and then the zooplankton eat that, and the small fish eat that, and the large fish eat the small fish, and then your flying carnivorous birds like eagles and hawks eat some of those other fish, the magnification of the pollutant goes up to 10 million parts per million. So it gets much higher as it reaches those higher order organisms, which makes it very dangerous for even a small amount of pollutant to land in the water, especially heavy metals and neurotoxins like mercury and DDT and stuff like that. Okay, so that was biomagnification. How efficient is the transfer of energy through each step of a trophic level? We talked about that a little bit. It's not very efficient. 90% is lost as you move up the food chain, and it's lost in the form of energy. Heat is lost. Draw a simple sketch to show the different population growth curves. Here is your exponential growth curve. It's J-shaped. Okay, it's where the population size is doubling with each generation, and it's inevitably going to lead to a population crash because you're going to run out of resources for the entire population. You'll have used everything up. The S-shaped growth curve is logical because it begins to grow and then it tapers off as it reaches the carrying capacity. So this is a good thing because it shows that the population size is not exceeding the resources that the environment can support. What happens if a species has little to no predators and rapidly hits its carrying capacity? We just said a population crash. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are complementary cycles. Carbon dioxide goes into plants. Plants turn through photosynthesis, will put out oxygen. Organisms take in oxygen for cellular respiration and then expel CO2. What are invasive species? Invasive species are things that are non-native. They're not natural to an ecosystem. They've been brought in on purpose or by accident by humans. An example of an invasive species is a Burmese python in the Florida Everglades. These big snakes are eating so many of the small mammals and birds in the Florida Everglades. The biodiversity is going down. A lot of bird species are becoming extinct, and it's costing Florida billions of dollars to try to manage the invasive species problem in Florida right now. They assumed that they were released from people who had them as pets, and then they got too big and they didn't want to pay for them anymore. So they released them, and they're out there in the ecosystem, and they're eating a lot of the wildlife that's native, that's natural to Florida. And these invasive species do cost billions of dollars to try to manage. The invasive species populations grow out of control because they typically don't have any natural predators where they're placed. So there's nothing to balance the growth of their population. Number 10, what's the greenhouse effect? What's the most abundant greenhouse gas in our atmosphere? And describe how the greenhouse effect contributes to global warming. Okay, so the most abundant greenhouse gas in our atmosphere is carbon dioxide. Methane is also another greenhouse gas. What happens here is, if remember what a greenhouse is, it's where you grow plants and it's covered in glass, and what happens is the sun's energy comes in, but it doesn't leave, which makes it nice and warm inside the greenhouse. On the Earth, and that's my really awesome drawing of the Earth, what's happening is the sun's energy comes in and it's supposed to bounce back out and leave the atmosphere. Very simply put, it comes in, but because the atmosphere is covered with a level of CO2 or methane gas, it kind of blocks the sun's heat from leaving, and it holds that heat inside, and that raises the temperature of the planet. Okay, this is an issue because you've got, well, we'll talk about that. That's another question. Okay, so that's basically in a nutshell what greenhouse gases are: carbon dioxide, methane, and they heat up the atmosphere, which raises the temperature of the earth. Number 11, what is a direct effect of habitat destruction and habitat fragmentation? Habitat destruction is going to produce a decline in populations and a decline in biodiversity. One of the examples that we talked about in class was the leopard population. Because of habitat destruction, they have less area to roam. Therefore, they have to resort to inbreeding. This is decreasing the variety in their gene pool, and they're becoming more susceptible to disease, and they're ultimately going to become extinct. Habitat fragmentation, I don't think we talked about in class, but it's pretty basic and straightforward. Here's your habitat. Here's a frog. This is the frog population. The frog usually comes over here to the water to lay its eggs. Okay, so that's what should be happening. In habitat fragmentation, you put a road right through where the frog used to cross to get to the water. So now when the frog comes over to try to get to the water to lay its eggs, it gets run over by cars. That's habitat fragmentation. It's where you've put some sort of obstacle in the way of a species from being able to complete its life cycle. So that's another bad thing.